All right, we're back. Another edition of Red versus Blue, episode number 65. My name is Mike Stark.
And I'm Keith Curry.
And we are back because there's a lot been going on over the last few weeks. And so we thought we'd check in with everybody and give our views on what the situation is. But before we get started, Keith did some great commentary last week on the demographics of how people feel about political violence. And you wanted to give some credit on the stats that you got on that, right?
Well, I did, Mike, because these have been used now in the New York Times and on The Daily Show and the Atlantic magazine. They've been quoted widely. And it's important to note that they came from Professor Kevin Wallstein of Cal State University at Long Beach, our alma mater.
Right.
And Long Beach does not get enough credit for some of the research that they do, but this was certainly the most on point and timely research that could possibly have been done in sort of the political public opinion area. And Professor Wallstein at Cal State Long Beach deserves the credit.
Yeah, and I don't think the highly partisan people on both sides are not going to listen to a guy like that, right?
Well, everybody's, they're in their trenches and they're dug in and they're fighting and they don't really care. But it's an important piece of information. Right. And if we're ever going to find a solution out of the cycle of political violence, it's going to start with knowing sort of where it comes from, how it's divided, and who is responsible. And
if you think it's just red versus blue, to coin a phrase, it isn't. And that's basically the message of his study.
Well, that's exactly right. It's generational in terms of people's tolerance for it. And we need to figure out why the younger generation is more tolerant than the boomers and guys like us. But whatever it is, it's a cancer on the society right now.
Let's move on to the subjects of the day. Why you spent the money and took the time, I cannot answer. But you dove into Kamala Harris's book. Tell me about what you drew from it, because I don't need the book to know she failed. There was a reason she failed. Was there any insight that you can give us beyond that?
Well, I just wanted to demonstrate how much of a political junkie I really am. But I did read 107 Days. I read it over a weekend. It's a pretty quick read. First of all, the good things. I think the book does a good job in humanizing her. I mean, she was in her sweatshirt with her grandnieces making cookies or something at her house when the call came on the cell phone. She was in Washington. Doug was in California. He was at the gym. He left his cell phone in the car. He went out with a couple of guys after working out, and one of their phones started blowing up with the news that Biden was out. And he got up and jumped and ran to his car to find the phone sitting on the seat, blowing up with messages. And you sort of really feel for them. And she does just a very painful job in discussing election night. And if you've ever, as I have been, a candidate who lost an election on election night that you thought you were going to win, I will just say I could feel her pain. She had an excellent staffer named Storm, a young woman who literally scraped Madam President off the cupcakes on election night before they could be put out to be served. She was responsible for driving the vice presidential candidates to the mansion to be interviewed, and that's where she was basically debriefed by Shapiro about how many bedrooms and passed that information on to Kamala, which contributed to her not liking him because she didn't figure he was focused enough on her. When Doug and Kamala had a fight, she went to Doug and said, listen, you got to fix this. Here's some notepads. I want you to write a note every night, and I'll have it delivered to the vice president wherever she's traveling. I hope that staffer got a job someplace because she was very, very good.
Wow.
On the other hand, her book has gotten a lot of flack, mostly from Democrats who would just as soon forget 2024 and not talk about it anymore. And a lot of that's pretty well deserved. She takes some shots at Biden and his team, along with Shapiro and others who, Shapiro mostly for asking about bedrooms and the logistics of living in the vice president's house. He has young kids, so it actually was an important thing to him. Mike, political bios come in two forms. First, there's the puff piece that you write sort of in advance of a campaign when you've got your future ahead of you or when you're leaving office as sort of your legacy. Gerald Ford wrote a great book called A Time for Healing, sort of highbrow, this is where it is. And there's the other book that you write, which is a score settling book where you sort of, put it all out there. And once again, Gerald Ford set the standard here. He wrote a book called Write It When I'm Gone that he wrote with a co-author that was literally published after Ford had died. And the book spent a significant amount of time settling scores, mostly with Ronald Reagan. that Gerald Ford had. This book is sort of betwixt and between. It tries to be a puff piece and it tries to be a score settler, and it really fails on both counts. It's somewhere in the middle. It's snarky, but it's not that really hard hitting. She avoids obviously taking responsibility for the loss, blames it on running out of time. You do get the appreciation because each chapter is a day in the 107 days.
Right.
That the clock was on and she was running out of time, but she really takes no blame for her own contribution to the loss. And Mike, as we said on this show, the problem with the Harris campaign is that in a country of 349 million people, she wanted to cut taxes for 100 million Americans, and everybody else could do the math.
Did you get an indication? Is she done with politics?
Well, she may not have thought she was when she wrote the book, but she's probably a little bit closer to being done now.
Oh, okay. This might have put the nail in the coffin, huh?
I don't think anybody is on the sidelines calling for her to, step up for leadership. I think people are looking at something new and different. We'll see where she goes.
People are grasping for something new and different. And
they're hoping to God.
Just not there at this point. Now, let's move into the bulk of this episode. And I'm going to turn it over to you, and we will call this 2 Weeks with Donald Trump.
Mike, we talked about an agenda, and there were some specific issues we could have talked about, but there were so many, and they all started running together. And it made me think that they all have a common theme. So I want to sort of approach it that way. Trump has been flooding the zone in some truly wild and sometimes bizarre ways. There was the whole Jimmy Kimmel thing where the FCC chairman came out and said you could do it the easy way or the hard way, like some kind of mafioso. Kimmel sort of won that battle. He went to the United Nations. He insulted nearly every other nation in the world. He prevented the Iranians from shopping at Costco. He deported the president of Colombia after he gave his speech there, revoked his visa. They filed charges against Comey. They had to actually fire the U.S. attorney from the Eastern District of Virginia, put in his own former personal attorney in the U.S. attorney's spot. She prepared a 2-page indictment. And let me just understand for our listeners the math of a grand jury. There are 23 members of the grand jury. You need 12 votes for an indictment. These 2 counts got 14 votes out of the 23, and a third count on perjury was not agreed to by the grand jury. So there were 2 counts that were accepted by the court. It's already being leaked that the U.S. attorney was set up to fail. None of the career people in the office would appear with her or would sign the indictment. They tried to find a paralegal to help her. Apparently, they couldn't do that. I think there is a very good possibility, Mike, that when this goes to court, the judge is going to dismiss the charges with prejudice, refer the U.S. attorney to the Bar Association for sanctions, and maybe award attorney's fees to Comey. It's that bad of a case. But that wasn't all. The president came out, although he cannot pronounce acetaminophen, he attacked Tylenol with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in what was a truly bizarre press conference. We're sending troops to Portland and Memphis, whether they want them or not. There was reporting that 246 FBI agents were sent to the Capitol. Trump picked that up and made it appear, in fact, said explicitly in a tweet that those 246 agents were there inciting the people to riot. That was picked up by many in the MAGAverse. In fact, I engaged with some people on Facebook who believe it to be true.
And we're talking about January 6th.
January 6th, right. Kash Patel himself came out and said they were sent up there after the riot had begun, at the request of Pelosi and of the leadership, because we couldn't get National Guard troops or other law enforcement there. And so they went up there to help with the crowd control. Now, that is not something the FBI does. All of those guys came out of a financial crimes office, or they came out of, following Russian spies or something so that they could go deal with the Trump terrorists at the Capitol. But that's not the same thing as they were there at the beginning to incite the riot, which is what Trump said, and which was been picked up by many of his MAGA followers. He posted a fake AI story about medbed. This is a theory of QAnon that apparently if you lay in a medbed, it will cure you of cancer and diabetes and God knows what else. But the president managed to pick it up, a complete phony thing, and put it out on his own Truth Media. He called all of the generals together yesterday, generals and admirals, and gave a rambling, incoherent 71-minute speech. He said he wants to bring back battleships because he likes the styling. He doesn't like the styling of modern stealth ships made out of aluminum because they're ugly. So that might be our new defense policy is more aesthetically pleasing ships, according to the president, which means they're going to be covered with gold by the time we're done with them. Hegseth was there. Hegseth also gave a speech, which was generally unglued. His staff is leaking the fact, or generals are leaking the fact, that he is manic in staff meetings. He gets up, he paces around, he yells and screams. So the knives are out for him, and he's clearly in over his head, and I think that was clear to folks. We had the funeral for Charlie Kirk, and he, of course, said that unlike Erica, who in a great display of Christian theology and charity forgave the killer, he says, I don't forgive my enemies, I hate my enemies, and just really postured himself in the opposite of where Christian theology is. So the question for all of that, Mike, is why is Trump now going all in on authoritarianism and just throwing everything against the wall to see if it sticks?
All the other stuff is just crazy Trump stuff that goes on all the time. But when he talked to the military and is trying to prep them to take up arms against American citizens, that's where I start to raise an eyebrow.
Well, he suggested that the way to train the troops to take a place like Fallujah is to send them to Detroit or Portland, and something that's clearly illegal. It's contrary to the Posse Comitatus Act, but it seems to be his MO of trying to look tough by sending soldiers where they don't belong, in cities where they don't want them, to make some kind of stand against crime. And of course, the soldiers can't make arrests. Right. So as a police force, they are not adequate to the task. The New York Times did an interesting analogy. They had a group of columnists get together and talk about this. And one of them had the sense that Trump is like a guy trying to walk up a down escalator, and that, unless he really speeds up, he's going to continue to lose ground. And that's sort of where he is. He must have seen polling that shows he's going to lose the House, and that means he's going to have congressional investigations and oversight for the first time in the second term. He's stuck at 43% approval, 54% disapproval. That's been the same since April, and that is a losing hand. So I think he's going to throw it all against the wall. He hopes his opponents cannot engage in all of it at the same time. A 30-minute newscast has 22 minutes for news. And if you've got 6 things that involve Donald Trump, you can't talk about all of them. Right. And I think that's how he believes he's going to overcome bad news coverage. Ultimately, this is to take the nation's mind off of the Epstein files. And ultimately, that is going to fail because too many people know what's in the files. Right. The victims know. The victims' lawyers know. Virginia Giuffre has got a new book coming out where she'll name names. There have been over 1,000 FBI agents assigned to edit his name out of the files. So all of them know, and that at least a couple of them have got a thumb drive hidden in the sock drawer for when they get fired at the FBI. The Epstein estate managers know. They're the ones that gave us the birthday book and the logs for the airplane and the island stays. Congressional investigators know. The pilots know. Maxwell knows. The household staff knows. And the men themselves who were involved, they all know. So it's going to come out. And if Watergate taught us anything, it's that the cover-up is the most damaging part of a situation like this. And
it's always the cover-up.
Because you do more crimes to facilitate the cover-up. And they're more easily indictable. And I think that's what's going to happen here. And he's making himself look crazy in a way that even his supporters have a difficult time explaining. It's splitting MAGA and conservatives. His own team is turning on themselves. Bondi, Patel, and Borgino are engaged in a behind-the-scenes fight. Bassett and Pulte are engaged in what almost turned into a real fight at a dinner in Washington. So you've got Marjorie Taylor Greene, who wants the Epstein files out, and Ted Cruz, who's fighting with Marjorie Taylor Greene. So it's splitting his coalition, and it's ultimately going to be the downfall.
But this all doesn't come to a head until the midterms, right?
Well, the midterms will be the catalyst. That's the great measuring stick. Have the people had enough and do they want to move in a different direction? That's why he's put so much focus on redistricting to try and have more Republican districts that they would otherwise lose. Although I'm not sure it's going to be successful.
So if the midterms shake things up and the Democrats win enough to take over the House and the Senate, I don't know how that looks at this point, but let's say there's some movement there, because there's certainly no movement in terms of finding a candidate for the next presidential election. Will that in itself maybe shake some people loose to become potential candidates?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of Democrats who are just waiting until the midterms get by so that there is a narrative to run on.
Right.
And Republicans, too. I think there's a lot more than J.D. Vance
Okay.
who will, on the Republican side, will jump into a race once it becomes clear that people may be tiring of Trumpism and MAGAism. And when that happens, you'll see a lot of activity. The other thing it does is if the Democrats control the House, I think the shot is long in the Senate, but getting better because they've fielded some good candidates and some Republicans are being forced out. That means that there's congressional oversight hearings. It means there's probably going to be another impeachment discussion. It means there's a lot of other things. The Democrats have leverage on the budget. If they take the Senate, that means they can leverage appointees. So that would really make Trump's life much, much more difficult, more like it was at the end of the first term.
So right now, the Republicans have the presidency, they have the Congress, and they have basically the Supreme Court. So they have control of all of the branches of government, yet they sit here and blame the Democrats for not being able to pass a budget. Now, this is the same rodeo, just different players, right?
Well, it is. Now, Trump said in 2013 and 2015 that if government shuts down, it's the fault of the president for lack of leadership. That's another one of his quotes I think he's going to conveniently forget. So notwithstanding that quote and notwithstanding the Republicans in control, the Republicans did, in fact, vote to keep the government open. I think the Democrats are going to get the blame for this. Chuck Schumer wisely avoided this fight in March, and he was pilloried by AOC and by the Democratic left. And he, like Mitch McConnell, who had the same kind of plan, are going to be demonstrated to have been smarter than some of these other guys because the Democrats, I think, are in a no-win situation. And let me give you an example. Two guys, Fromm and Fuller, do a podcast similar to ours in Maryland. Craig was chief of staff to the Vice President Bush, and they did an online poll. 80% of the generals thought Hegseth and Trump were nuts in their presentation. So it's a left-leaning group of listeners who responded to that.
Right.
But of that group, 50% think the Democrats are going to get the blame for the shutdown versus 25% for the Republicans. And 25% will go both ways. So you see that even among, smart people who are leaning to the left, the Democrats are sort of set up to fail on this. And ultimately, I think they're going to have to cave.
I cynically, of course, have to ask, well, if once the budget's signed, and it does go through, which it probably will at some point, right? Do the Democrats get credit for that?
No, they're not going to get any credit. It's painful for people in a place like Virginia and Maryland, where you've got a lot of government employees who are getting, laid off, and where the government is, a big part of the local economy, like Alaska. Right. So it's going to be painful in red states and blue states. Yeah. And here's the thing: this is a 7-week extension of the status quo. It's not an adoption of the budget. It's keeping the government open for 7 more weeks so they can negotiate these issues. So because of that, the health care cuts don't really kick in until December. People are not feeling the pain for them. Right. And therefore, they're not relating to the arguments the Democrats are making. So they'd be well advised, in my opinion, to get this done and then hold the Republicans' feet to the fire as they negotiate the actual budget bills and force Republicans to vote on those. But right now, everybody's in their corners. The president put out another fake AI image of Hakeem Jeffries wearing a sombrero with a big mustache and putting phony words into the mouth of Chuck Schumer that makes him look juvenile. I mean, think about the meeting with the generals, Mike. In the Situation Room in Beijing and in Moscow, people are watching that. And think about what the leadership in those countries is thinking about America and about the opportunities that now present themselves because they can see that we're led by immature people doing stupid things focused on personal pique and ego issues. Then also think about what the people in the Situation Rooms in Seoul and in Manila and in Canterbury, Australia, and in Taiwan and in the Baltic countries are thinking when they look at that and say, our national security and independence is dependent upon those two crazies.
Right.
It is just a tragic situation for the world.
The military men that attended that meeting, there has been no leakage on that I've heard of what they thought about what they heard. I'm hoping, and that's what the military does. They're tight-lipped. Tight lips don't sink ships, right? So they're tight-lipped about this. But do you think that maybe it made an impression on them that, okay, we have to live by our oath, which is not to this man, but to the Constitution? Do you think that may have put some concrete into that?
Yes, I do. Here's the thing. He spoke to some enlisted men earlier at a different military installation and threw out some red meat. And there he did get applause lines. Those were privates and enlisted folks. The generals, I think, were to a man, and apparently there were a couple of women there, although they may still be in the service, convinced that they were not going to do that. They were going to sit there and be silent. Trump even said, "This is the quietest crowd I've ever spoke for. You have permission to clap." And nobody did. And I think the absence of noise was the biggest noise in the room. And you can tell when Trump doesn't get the feedback from the audience and he throws out those lines, it's such a hollow, empty presentation. I mean, it's like, letting a tape recorder run while nobody's in the room. Right. It's just noise.
Right.
And he's not prepared for that. I don't think he can't react to a crowd that way that ignores him. And I think that was a statement from the generals. And while they have not leaked they didn't need to leak from the meeting because it was televised. I could watch it here at home.
Sure.
Live. But you are seeing now leaks coming out of Hegseth's staff meetings that say, Hegseth is manic. He gets up, he wanders around, he can't hold a thought. He's paranoid. He's got an extra security detail because he's paranoid about his personal security. Those leaks are coming out, leaks about Pulte and Bissett to getting almost into a fistfight at dinner. The infighting going on between Patel and Bondi, all of that stuff is coming from somebody who's in the White House or somebody who's in the administration. And so you're going to see more of that. They hold a mirror up to themselves and they show people, even some of the MAGA people, just how really crazy they are. And that's not sustainable. Yeah. And it's like bankruptcy. It happens slowly and then all at once. And I think that's what's going to happen here.
Okay, we covered a lot of ground. I think we covered it, don't you?
I think we're up to date for now.
I need a breather after that. So let's just tell everybody, like us on Facebook, subscribe if you haven't subscribed, leave us a comment. We're getting comments occasionally, and some of them are even favorable. Can you believe that? It's awesome. So drop us a note and let us know what you think, and we will be back again soon for another edition of Red versus Blue.
Thanks, everybody. Go Dodgers.